Well, welcome everyone to Energy Impacts and joint interview along with Stu Turley at Energy News Beat with one of our very favorite people who has been on our podcast several times in the past, Meghan Lapp, spokesperson for Sea Freeze Limited, and has done a sterling job as a spokesperson really for the marine fishery industry in the Northeast as Joe Biden's offshore wind boondoggles have become a thing out there over the past few years. Meghan, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thanks for on.
Meghan was telling me before we started this thing that she is living in a house that's 300 years old?
Yep.
Now in Connecticut, my goodness, and having all sorts of fun with the local wildlife out in the country. And I'm familiar with those kinds of challenges. It's a lot of fun. I'm sure it's as much fun in Connecticut as it is in Texas.
Yeah.
Stuart, how are you today up in Oklahoma in your beautiful lake house?
Oh, absolutely wonderful, and just having a lot of fun up here, getting ready to do some fishing. And Meghan, I want to know, how's your sword creation going? When you were on the podcast, you had a beautiful swordfish sword behind you last time.
Yeah, I haven't made too many of them recently. I have a fish tote with some bills in it, but I have not actually gone and built anything recently. But yeah, I gotta get the guys on my boats to save me a few if they catch any.
Do you market those?
No.
Oh, I was going to say, if you have a website for them, we can put that in the show notes.
Oh, well, thank you.
But anyway, I'd love to have one. I would certainly pay money for a swordfish snout sword. That would be fun. So let's talk about wind. Obviously, the reason you got involved on this, the negative impacts these enormous offshore wind projects are having on the marine fisheries industry up there in the Northeast. You recently wrote a wonderful story that I actually reprinted at my Substack, your permission, thank you, about Empire Wind and the challenges it presents in so many ways offshore the state of New York and within 8 miles proximity to JFK Airport to its flight lanes. And talk about what's going on there and why you decided to write that excellent story about it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I believe it was April, the Trump administration issued a stop work order for Empire Wind. And Secretary Burgum said the permits had been rushed through the Biden administration. Actually said that they were faulty, which is correct. It was rushed through by the Biden administration and the permits are faulty. And so that was a big relief for everyone in the commercial fishing industry. That is a project I personally have been fighting since 2015. And there are so many problems with it, David, that I could go into. We could be here for 5 hours. And then, in about a month later, the Trump administration issued an order without explanation. It didn't say there was no rationale, just said, you guys can go ahead with construction. And then all of a sudden news hit the headlines saying that Trump and Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, had done a deal for a pipeline through New York to New England. And I know, they've been trying to get the Constitution pipeline through for a very long time to get natural gas to New England. And New York State has blocked that pipeline because to get to New England, you got to go through New York. So, and that's been a very for many years. But, then Hochul came out and said, no, there was no pipeline deal. And then Norwegian media, this is interesting, Norwegian media is saying, oh, yes, there 100% was a pipeline deal. And that's why we're allowed to go forward, because that project is owned by Equinor, which is 70% owned by the government of Norway. And the government of Norway makes all the decisions for that company. So it's essentially, we have leased, this offshore wind lease at the entrance to New York Harbor to a foreign government. And so,
wow.
Yeah, it's a problem. And actually, I'm a board member of Protect Our Coast, New Jersey, and we filed a complaint for a lawsuit a couple weeks ago there on this project. And one of the things that we're alleging is, look, a foreign government can't own a lease. This is a foreign government owning a lease.
It definitely is. There's no question about that.
So anyway, but the article that I wrote really touches on a lot of these things, the reasons why the permit is faulty. There's so many, for the fishing industry, which is where, I started off researching this entire thing. The lease is sited squarely on squid, which is calamari, and scallop fishing grounds. And it was so bad that prior to the lease sale, which was held during the Obama administration, National Marine Fisheries Service, which manages U.S. federal fisheries, said this area should be recited, and all of the parts of the lease that conflict the most with fisheries need to be eliminated. And of course, the Obama administration at the time was like, no, the woman, I was at a meeting with Abby Hopper, who was the director of BOEM at the time, and she started the meeting knowing that fishing was pushing back. She started the meeting saying, I'm not a marine biologist, but I'm a history maker. And then proceeded to say how they were history with the New York wind farm prior to any analysis being done, even though that they knew that they had problems with fishing. So that's how it started, and that's how it continued. The Coast Guard said we need these setbacks from the traffic lanes. There are traffic lanes into New York Harbor. They wanted a 2 nautical mile setback from the actual traffic lanes, 5 nautical miles setback from the entry exit to the TSS. And BOEM said, nah, we're going to give them a mile because, the developer needs flexibility. So you had that. Then later
Holy cow.
Then later on, there were studies showing about the aerospace interference. Wind turbines, they're very, very tall. They're bigger than the ones on land, and they interfere with air defense radar, long-range air surveillance radar, right? So they did a study but it only extended to New York. It didn't go further down the coast. So Newark Airport wasn't included with having its fair share of troubles recently with their radar. But it showed that the Empire Wind Project would interfere with nearly the entire line of sight of JFK Airport's radar.
Yeah.
And that wind farm is directly on the entryway. It's like a pattern to go into JFK. I'm originally from Long Island. I know where these planes fly. I watch them. They're like ducklings, one behind the other, and they go right there. So I'm like, well, this is a problem. The report came out and said, well, it can, because of the interference that this project will create, aircraft can hide in the airspace above the wind farm, and you won't be able to detect them. So if anybody remembers 9/11, radars were tracking those planes, and now you have a blind spot, right, where aircraft can hide. You will not be able, the detectability for real targets drops. And when you have multiple, planes in the air all the time, which you have area, it's an extremely busy area. It's like, is anybody looking at this? And the answer is no, because the FAA said, well, anything outside of 12 nautical miles from shore, we just leave that up to BOEM.
Right.
And it's like, BOEM doesn't do planes. And first and there was an executive order under, I think it was Reagan or something, that gives the FAA authority out to all American airspace. So I'm like, that's not a real excuse. And there's in the federal code of regulations, there's rules that say if the FAA's equipment is going to be interfered with, the Secretary of Transportation shall do an investigation into what this means, and then shall report out what the emissions to air traffic are. And so they have kicked it to the DOD to look at. The DOD has also said, well, BOEM makes the decisions on energy. I'm like, you're the DOD. That's not real life either. And so they approved the project.
Yeah.
Right. They approved the project saying, well, the DOD can figure out a mitigation solution later. And for them and the FAA. Meanwhile, the DOD and the FAA are part of a full interagency wind turbine radar interference mitigation working group, which has been in existence since 2014. And they have since 2016 had a memorandum of understanding that they were going to fully address the problems with radar interference from windmills by 2025. And then when it was coming up to 2025, they kind of looked around and went, well, we didn't find any solutions. We only found more problems. So do is re-up that MOU to 2035. Okay. Now the UK has no solution. Nobody else that already has windmills has a solution, right? So now this interagency working group, DOD and FAA and Coast Guard, actually the Coast Guard I think is a bystander in it, but they have now extended their timeline to 2035. So what happens if we got these windmills there and by 2035 we still have no, like we don't have a solution? The FAA has not even done a basic thing to look and go, if the radar interferes, and that's obviously a huge problem, do you have to reroute all the air traffic? Do you have to take all those approaches and reroute them around the wind farm?
So yeah, I mean, what other solutions they're going to be?
Like there's practical solutions that the DOD is not going to look at that, because the DOD's job to look at commercial air traffic. Like you have to look at, from a commercial air traffic perspective, what should you be doing? And then if it were to go forward, right? But then the DOD perspective, it's like, does anybody remember like in December, all the drones? Remember, like when everybody in New York and New Jersey was like losing their mind because drones.
What happened with all those drones? Yeah.
Right. Then they just magically like fell off the radar and like nobody talked about it anymore. But meanwhile, in December 2024, which is when all those drones were happening, Estonia was killing NATO allies. Estonia was killing wind farms because they said they wouldn't be able to see drones in the vicinity of the wind farm. And then Sweden killed 13 offshore wind projects in the Baltic Sea because they're right across from Russia. And obviously they're afraid of Russia at the moment. And so they said our military defense capabilities are more important than a quote unquote green energy project. And they said it would reduce their incoming missile detection time by half. They wouldn't be able to see aircraft over the wind farm, and they wouldn't be able to hear submarines. So they said, well, we have to get rid of this because we can't have that happen. And I'm like, but we can do it at like the entrance to New York Harbor. Someone please explain this to me like I'm 5. Explain it to me like I'm 5. How that's okay. And the excuse is now all of a sudden that there was a pipeline deal. Well, that doesn't fix the other issues, right? That were permitted in a rushed manner because the Biden administration wanted the projects done, didn't care about all of these other real problems. They're real problems. And I don't know if you guys saw Martha McCallum grilled Secretary of Energy Chris Wright the other day, and she was asking him, she must have read this article, and she kept pushing him, and he was like, oh, well, but we have a pipeline. And she was like, yep, that's not, that's
he,
like not
he didn't want to.
For safety.
I thought it was a bad look, and I'm a fan of Secretary Wright's, but I thought that interview went very badly for him because he simply would not address the question directly. Asked it like 3 or 4 times, and that's never a good look for anybody, right?
No, but you know what? Honestly, I don't think he knew. I don't think Secretary
he may not have, but he should have been prepped for it.
He should have been prepped. Yeah. But I don't think the secretary necessarily, he and his staff are fairly new as well. I don't know if everybody is really, Secretary Burgum, however, did say this permit was faulty and pulled it back. Right. So he's the guy in charge of the offshore. What's his answer to that? What's his response? What about the Secretary of Transportation? Hey, I watched Sean Duffy, who I really do like, and he was speaking after the DCA crash, right? And he was really upset because he said the FAA had information that said that there were a lot of like near misses in this area. Why wasn't something done? Now people are dead. And he was really upset. And I kind of look at this like the same thing, like information that says that this is a huge problem, right? Like who's taking proactive steps to address this? And I really believe when Secretary Burgum issued that, stop work order, that was a step. And immediately be like, well, we'll just exchange it for a pipeline. That's not a solution.
And so I think what we have at play here is a political calculation. Obviously, it's a political calculation that Interior and Energy and the president want those pipelines. It's two different pipelines that will bring that gas both to New York City and its harbor and also to New England from the Marcellus. The other calculation I think they're having is this project's probably going to get canceled anyway once Congress rescinds the subsidies for wind that were contained in the IRA, because it will become at that point a non-economic project. Now, I don't know if they're right about that or not, but I think that's probably the calculation they've decided to make here is if Hochul wants this thing and she's going to let these pipelines go through. Well, this project's probably going to die anyway, so why not let it go? But I just, it is a bad look, I think, to immediately I think it was less than a month after they issued the stop work order that they rescinded it. And that shows a lack of real diligence in my view. And just not a good way to run a ship, in my view. Talk about too, I mean, so at what stage is Empire Wind at in its construction? I mean, there are already towers constructed out there, right?
No. And
there aren't.
That is the key. And that's what I was going to say. I don't think Secretary Burgum or President Trump, they were the folks making this decision. You know, Secretary Burgum's staff is new. He's new, like fairly new, right? And they should be knowing this before they make trades for pipelines. But Kathy Hochul kept saying in the media, and I'm sure when she was on the phone with them, the project is 30% complete. And that was a bold-faced lie. There is no steel in the water. That was the thing.
Well,
and that's not true. So I think it was probably pitched to them as, well, the project's already a third done anyway. You might as well just let it go, right? But that was a lie. There was not one piece of steel in the water when those negotiations were going on or those discussions were going on. And so for them to then make a decision, first of all, if stuff's illegally issued, it's illegal to just make a trade for a pipeline anyway, because there's the Administrative Procedures Act doesn't let you do that. But, but
that's why they can't admit this was a quid pro quo, right?
Right. But, if during those discussions, if the status of the project was misrepresented to the Trump administration and they didn't do their own due diligence and really figure out what was going on, because Equinor not put any, no steel in the water, but as soon as the go-ahead work order was given, they brought this giant vessel called the Thialf from the Netherlands. It crossed the Atlantic. It docked in Newport Road. In the harbor, it couldn't dock, things so big. It anchored. And then it stayed there for about a week before moving on to the Empire Wind lease site. And it's only been within the past day or two that boat has been on, and there have been feeder barges then coming up to it. So I don't know if they have just driven the first pile or if they're starting it right now. You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to tell unless you have somebody out there, but you can see now the vessels are on site. None of that happened until that go ahead, that work order went ahead. And so, I'm like, I really sincerely hope that information does get to the Trump administration, because they were lied to. And so that
shock.
Yeah, right. So I'm like, it's not too late to stop this. It is not too late to stop this. It is not too late to say, yo, hold off, because they haven't done anything yet. And you know what I find really funny? And I look at this, like, shake my head. So back in the day, we used to have these things called light ships, and they were basically a lighthouse on a boat. Okay.
Right. Yeah,
and so like they would go at the entrances to harbors and things like that. The Coast Guard used them for navigational aids back in the day. Well, it used to be this one called Ambrose Lightship. And that was right kind of near where this project is sited. And then they turned it from a light ship, they turned it into a tower. So it was a tower with like a light on it or whatever, supposed to be a navigational aid for the Coast Guard. They took it down. Coast Guard took it down because so many tankers hit it.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So New York Harbor, lots of tankers, lots of boats, lots of, they had so many collisions with it and this is a navigational aid, right? That they took it down because it was like a problem. So now we're going to put, I think the whole Empire Wind project together is supposed to be like 154 turbines or something.
Oh my God.
So think about that, right? And these cause radar interference on boats. So I'm like, does anybody remember that one time when we had Ambrose Tower and then we didn't anymore because of collisions? Like,
wow.
Go ahead. If wind turbines cause radar problems with boats, they're going to cause radar with airplanes.
Right.
I can't
Radar.
it's called radar.
Right.
This is a problem.
It's a
Yeah.
problem.
How tall are these towers associated with this project? I know that some of the planned projects are planning to build towers 900, 1100 feet tall.
Mhm.
And the blades, people need to understand the blades are 300 or 400 feet long too.
Right.
And so on an 1100-foot tower, the blade's going to spin 100, 200 feet above that. I mean, these are not onshore 300-foot turbine towers. These are big
Right.
offshore, very tall towers.
Very tall. Yeah. The turbines for Empire Wind are supposed to be over 900 feet tall.
Holy cow.
And that does include the blade, but
Yeah.
still, you know what I mean? Yeah, they are 300 to 400 feet long, the blades. And when those are spinning and you got 3 of them spinning on each tower, it does cause interference. It causes a lot of things. And, why you would want to put them here is like beyond me. It's like the worst possible location that you could ever have.
It's like the industry only seeks out the most destructive locations they can find. I mean, some of the others are planned for long known whale migration
Right.
corridors, right? In the Gulf of Mexico, they wanted big wind farms right in the middle of bird migration corridors in the Gulf of Mexico. It's just a bizarre dynamic as far as I'm concerned for these corporations like Equinor, like Shell, like BP, like Ørsted, who love to boast about their concerns for the environment and for endangered species, investing in these projects they know are going to kill endangered species of mammals and birds. And it's like, well, it's okay because it's wind.
Right.
It's the most bizarre thought process
How
in our
can
society
the
today.
what David, how can the Fish and Wildlife issue eagle permits so that they kill an allotted amount of eagles that the rest of the farmers get hauled to jail for? I don't get this.
Well, it's just the way it is. I mean, we have a religion going on here. So that's Empire Wind. And Empire Wind, I still believe, will never get built and won't be open. Apparently they're going to try to build at least one tower here before it falls apart. Then you have the Atlantic Shores Project. Pete Murphy, governor of New Jersey's pet project. Funding for it got pulled. Operation canceled last week. That one's gone. Was that one of the ones you were most concerned about as well?
I know that New Jersey was very concerned about that one.
Yeah.
Boats don't fish in that particular site. Although I will say Atlantic Shores was going to seriously interfere with Atlantic City Airport.
Yeah.
And there was data on that. And the FAA was like, well, there's only this many turbines. They only counted the ones inside of 12 miles and they ignored, the 60 plus other ones that were going to be real problems for them outside of 12 miles. And I was like, no, that's not real. So that's, I did comment to the FAA on that particular project, as well as the Empire project from the aeronautical radars, perspective from the studies that the government already had. But there's been such an incredible abdication of authority and responsibility by various agencies. It is easier for the agencies to say, well, Boeing's in charge. And then they don't have to do their jobs or actually have the responsibility to, say to an administration, like, no, you can't do this. Or no, we don't recommend that you do this, because politically nobody wants to rock the boat. And that's been really disappointing. Like when you think that, you look at it and you go, oh, well, it's okay. The FAA, they're looking out for safety. Oh, look, it's okay. The Coast Guard, they're looking out for safety. And then you actually find out that they're not. That's really disturbing. And then as a citizen, you kind of wonder, what other situations are out there that are that they're also not looking at, kind of, it's really disappointing when people abdicate their responsibility and their fiduciary duty to the American people to play politics. And,
Right.
that is not.
No, it's not. And unfortunately, setting up agencies like that to where it's so easy to pass the buck between them so nobody ever has to take responsibility for anything is intentional.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
just in the federal government, every state government,
Yep.
local government too.
Yep.
It's pathetic, but it seems to be human nature. The Vineyard wind thing was another big fiasco for the wind industry last year. The big blade collapse polluted the beaches of Nantucket, waters
Yep.
offshore, killed a lot of fish, a lot of marine mammals. That project had actually partially gone into production, right? I mean, it was in operation, not the full project, but part of it before that happened.
Yeah. So here's the fun fact about the tax subsidies, because this is where what Empire Wind is doing also plays into this. They only have to start saying they are producing power. They get it.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't mean that the project has to be fully built or the project doesn't have to be fully operational.
Right.
They can just have a turbine and it's spinning. And actually, I've been told by people, working out on the press, kind of like for one of the projects, they weren't actually producing power. They had the generator on and the generator was producing power through the turbine, but they could say electrons are flowing, so we qualify.
Right. And it doesn't have to even be tied into the grid yet, right? I mean, they can be producing power and it not benefiting anyone.
It's kind of like, I don't know if it has to be tied into the grid or not, but like on one of the projects, I had heard that had been the case. So with Vineyard Wind, they have a handful of them, quote unquote, built, quote unquote, producing power. So they'll qualify, right? I mean, Empire Wind could put in one turbine and just like turn it on, or put a generator on it and just have it produce power and say, look, it's producing power. We get the tax credits, right?
Wow.
So,
and that may be what they're
Wind,
trying to do now. Yeah.
Yeah. With Vineyard Wind, so after the blade break, and then radio, there was a radio outlet in Canada that unveiled that the Gaspé that had been producing the blades, they had, like, the workers were told by upper management, allegedly, to just rush through everything. They needed the stuff, so falsify the safety records and QA/QC data and just run it through, right? And this happens, blade breaks. So then there was an investigation. Bessie did an investigation. And then the result of that was that they told Vineyard Wind they had to take all the blades or the blades off of 22 turbines. Okay. So that's 66 blades, them down because they're all faulty. And then they said you have to put them on a boat and ship them to France, get them fixed, and then bring them back. So that is occurring right now. Okay. So Vineyard Wind is incredibly behind. They will not answer any of the questions from the media. The media is like asking them questions. They won't say anything. They've like re-upped their lease for the marine terminal they have been using by like another 2 years. This allegedly, according to some reports, it's the blade breaks already cost them like $700 million. And, obviously being behind schedule is also going to cost you money. And so I don't know if that was factored into that or not, but it's like a total, complete disaster. And they won't say anything. They won't admit anything. But the real thing is, like, they know that blades break. Everybody, like, the wind industry knows that blades break. I read one report of some that had broken on land out in like Oklahoma or something, and they a blade liberation event that happened. So, then that company was getting sued and everything. So they know that this happens, right? So you would think that part of knowing that this happens, that this is a fairly common occurrence, that you would have a plan in place to deal with it if and when it happens, right? Like they had to have an oil spill response plan in case all the oil and petrochemicals in the turbine, if something were to happen, it were to leak out, they had to have an oil spill response plan. So you would think that they would have a blade break response plan also, so that there would be some kind of protocol to follow if this actually happened. And of course there wasn't, right? There wasn't. So none of the projects have a blade response plan.
Well, you know why that is, right? Because if you have to have an emergency response plan to it, you're admitting that it's not green. It's toxic. It's a danger to the surrounding area. So that's why they don't have to have a plan for that, because they want to be able, and the government under Biden and Obama wanted them to be able to continue to put up their green facade.
Right.
So I wonder, so the Trump administration's been in office now for going on 5 months. Not a lot of time, but they only have 4 years in office. So, I mean, time is flashing by. Have you in your industry noticed any improvement in the response to your concerns from the NMFS, for example, or other agencies you deal with?
Well, kind of the fullness of that remains to be seen right now. According to Trump's executive order on day one, there's, a review that's being conducted of the wind projects, right? And so I'm sure all the interagencies are involved in that. And I will say FS NIMS, they really did raise a lot of issues, even under the previous administration. Like there are records that show, hey, this stuff's a problem. They put information out there that the Biden administration ignored, that hopefully, the Trump administration can look at and use to see, here are real valid concerns that were basically steamrolled so that permits could be issued.
Yeah.
And we know that that's true. We know that that's the case. Because I've read their comment letters. I was there when they were saying, hey,
Right. Yeah.
you should recite Empire Wind. It's really bad. There's a lot of conflicts. And, at that time, the Obama administration, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Fine. So I'm hoping that those, all of those things that have been there before now actually maybe, are given a little bit of weight by the new admin,
But your industry is also, I guess, in part, right, as is regulated by BOEM too, right? Don't they have some authority over you, or is it all NMFS?
It's all NIMS and it's all in the Department of Commerce. We are
Okay.
in the Department of Commerce. So, but we've got a lot more regulations than offshore wind.
Yeah. Well, of
So,
course. Yeah. I mean, that's the case everywhere. That one of the biggest concerns for me is that these projects are not properly bonded. No real regulation requiring proper disposal and dismantling once the salt water destroys them, which is going to happen very quickly. I mean, they're going to be free to just leave all that crap out there in the ocean to rot. And, that's not, it's something that has to change. The same thing onshore. There's no real regulatory requirements for these big wind farms to be properly dismantled and disposed.
right.
And so you're going to end up with these blots on the landscape all over the damn country, because the original developers are going to sell to smaller and smaller developers who aren't going to have the financial wherewithal to do anything with them when the thing's out of business. So it's an awful situation that no one's thinking about. I'm hoping this administration will be more diligent in that regard ultimately, although it doesn't seem to be getting to an ideal start here, particularly where Empire Wind's concerned. So what are you, where do we go from here with the new administration, with the industry in general? Do you have are there any upcoming hearings? Do you have anything on the horizon that we ought to be on the outlook for?
Well, I would say, keep your eye on the Protect Our Coast New Jersey lawsuit, because, one of the cruxes of that lawsuit is the Administrative Procedures Act. You can't say a permit's faulty, it was rushed, and it's defective, and then do a deal pipeline. Like that's not administrative procedure, right?
Right.
And so I think that really does have merit. And I am curious to see how a judge will handle that. So I think
that's going to be really interesting, actually.
Yeah, I think it really will
Especially
be.
with all the media around it. Yeah.
Right. So, and I think, as far as stuff that needs to be done, there has to be a different way. First of all, I think every single lease should be rescinded because they were improperly leased in the first place, right? Everything is faulty. The foundation's faulty. The building's going to be faulty. And so there's that. But then I think, somebody's really got to think, okay, You can't have like the DOD and the FAA and the US Coast Guard and everybody else just bowing down at the feet of BOEM all the time. BOEM is not, and should not be the authority for those things. Somebody really needs to change this. The DOD should have veto power all day long. The FAA should have veto power all day long. The Coast Guard should have veto power all day long. This should not be the BOEM show. And, you know, because I don't even know how that was even concocted in the first place. You know, this whole defer to the other agency thing, but I think that has to be first order. Like before anything is in there, it should have to go through very, very review at each one of those agencies. And if they say no, or if they say, well, it should be amended, or whatever they should say, that should be the end of it. Like that to me is insane. The United States Navy in 2017 did an analysis, and it was a wind compatibility analysis for the East Coast. And it was based on 800-foot high turbines, and all of them are higher than 800 feet now. So you would have to redo this, right? And almost the whole East Coast was red. It was a wind exclusion zone. And there's like projects in the red, including one off Virginia, which is on the way to Norfolk. Right. So I'm like, it says red, that means no. And that means you can't build here. Like, that should have been a definitive, absolute no. All these leases have to go. And
the point I've tried to make is if this industry had been subject to the same regulatory scrutiny that the Department of Interior mainly has always subjected the oil and gas offshore industry to, there wouldn't be a single wind turbine built in the Atlantic Ocean today.
Yeah.
It's such a clear example of bureaucratic bias, I guess it is, and politics interfering with the way these laws are supposed to be enforced. And that's the only thing that's enabled industry to grow in the first place.
Absolutely. You know, I actually had done some digging into oil and gas permits in the Gulf of America because I wanted to know. I was like, we've been doing oil and gas a long time. And, you know, not that gas doesn't have the radar interference problems, right? Like, so all of those problems don't exist with it. And so when they do shallow hazard seismic with sparkers and other equipment, which the wind industry uses the same make and model sparkers as the oil industry, when they're doing shallow hazard seismic to see where like pipelines would go, it's the same equipment as when the wind industry wants to see where cables can go. It's the same. Yeah. But the oil industry, they had rules. And they had to submit survey plans to BOEM that contained all kinds of information, including how close they were to other surveys in the area. And they were told, you have to do these things because of the impact to marine mammals, the potential impact from your equipment and your activities. Then on the NOAA side, NOAA said, well, if you're ExxonMobil and you're doing these surveys and you know, a mammal live strands within 50 kilometers of your activity, you immediately have to stop, and we can do investigations. And we can do investigations if we think mammal strandings are correlating with your activity. Right. Then when you looked at the same permits for wind has no rules. They don't have to submit any plans to BOEM for their surveys. They can just do whatever they want. They can have overlapping surveys in space and time. And NIMS doesn't require any kind of shutdowns. But there were plenty of dead marine mammals, including large whales, within 50 kilometers of their operations. And like you said, if it had been the same rules, there would not be anything going on because they would have been shut down many years ago. So it's like, again, like, yeah, the Marine Mammal Protection Act didn't change. And if that's the act that all of these, you know, rules and regulations are, you know, pursuant to, well, then, you know, that's not okay.
What changed? The only thing that changed was the politics around it.
Right.
Stu, I haven't let you get a word in edgewise there.
Well, I got one is that I feel that all this research that I've been looking at is showing that solar panels and wind turbines are going to have more ecological damage than nuclear has since its inception. And the microplastics are absolutely horrific on the marine animals and the food that the fisheries are having to catch. This is a real problem. The microplastics off those blades are a huge problem.
Well, I can tell you, Stu, every summer, if you go to the Block Island wind farm off of Block Island in Rhode Island, you will see these dudes out on like, they've got like cables and stuff attached to them. They're on the blades and they're like refiberglassing the leading edge of the blades.
Yeah.
Okay. Every year, you're like, what's that guy? What's that guy doing? And he's out there and they have to, you'll get these notices like, we're working on the wind farm. And because apparently there was like there was a YouTube video on this that a friend of mine showed me, and it was basically saying how the leading edge of the blade, it goes really fast. Right. And on land and at sea, well, they just forgot that sometimes there can be, dust or salt in the air. So when the engineers didn't think about that. They of course built this in a bubble. So now when these blades are going, the salt in the sea spray, or, on land, the dust in the air from dirt, it erodes the leading edge of the blade. And then it causes all kinds of problems. Then the blades can kind of start to wobble because they're not exactly perfectly aerodynamic now. And then they can crack things. And a few years ago, the Block Island wind farm had to shut down for the whole summer because there were stress fractures in the rotors. Yep. And I bet you it was because of that, because they had been doing the fiberglassing on the leading edge of the blade. So you don't really know, I can't say that definitively, but like you put 2 and 2 together and go,
yeah, it isn't hard, is it?
It's kind of like, looks like that.
It doesn't seem real complicated to me, but who am I?
Yeah, there's 79,000 ballpark wind turbines in the United States. Of those 79,000, it's going to take between 350,000 to 980,000 per wind farm to do land reclamation, just to haul the crap off. This is a gigantic budgetary problem to get rid of these things.
Not per wind farm, per wind turbine.
Per wind turbine. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And 79,000 of them. And I went to Oklahoma State and I can barely count that high. Holy smokes.
And that's 200, by the way, 240,000 blades.
Yes.
Right. Got to multiply by 3. Anyway. Well, Megan, I always end up being depressed. But I feel like, and I want to encourage you to not be dismayed about what's happening with Empire Wind, because I think ultimately, I believe the thought process, and I have reason to believe this within the administration, is that thing is going to ultimately fail anyway, because it's just not economically viable without the subsidies, without the IRA subsidies. And so I think was a big factor in what's happened with that project. But I know it's incredibly frustrating, right? I mean, it's frustrating to me too.
Yeah.
I hate any time when politics intercedes to create a situation where the laws aren't being followed and the regulations aren't being properly applied. And that seems to be the case here. But with the rest of it, Atlantic Shores is gone. I just think that we're going to see a whole cascade.
I apologize. We got a problem going on here.
What? Are you not hearing me?
You're back now.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just filibustering. It's no big deal, but I think we need to close. We're gonna close here. We're way over time, but that's okay too. It's always a pleasure, and let's plan to regroup here in the fall.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Thank you. Well, wait. Before we go, where can people find you?
So I'm on Facebook and I just post, news articles continually. You can also go to Protect Our Coast, New Jersey. They've got a lot of good information, both on social media as well as their webpage. And yeah.
You don't do X?
I only do X for my own personal news sourcing. Okay. I don't actually use it for like real posting. But yeah.
Well, we all have to pick and choose among the 872 social media apps that we can use. Right? I'm too old to use more than 2. Stu, anything for the good of the order?
I think is a fantastic discussion. Meghan, thank you for your leadership. We're
Yes.
just not getting the story out there fast enough, and it's criminal that the wind farms have done this. And I just put out this morning from Secretary Chris Wright. They are parasites on the grid, and I really think that Secretary Wright is spot on. So
It
again,
is.
great job, guys.
By the way, Stu and I both know that there are people at Interior, at Department of Energy, and elsewhere in the administration who watch these things. So if you have a direct message you'd like to send to anyone in the government, this is a chance to do it before we close. In
Well-
addition to what you've already shared.
Well, hey guys, I'd like a meeting.
Yeah.
I have been trying to get to President Trump since like 2016, actually, like primaries, man. Like let's go. And I would love the opportunity to speak to Secretary Wright or Secretary Duffy or Secretary Burgum or any of the secretaries, involved in this, because I know it's a big like learning curve as far as, what's actually happened during the entire Biden administration, and like you said, people have been there for 5 months, but I have a decade's worth of an arsenal that I would definitely appreciate the chance to share.
Okay, folks, all you people in Washington, pay attention. You know where to find her. You can message her on Facebook. There we go.
And find us, and we'll get in touch with her, and then we will all be on a boat having a podcast out live.
I like that.
I will bring my Starlink gear, and we will do a live podcast from the ocean.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, that's it for today, folks. We'll be back soon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Meghan.
Thank